Dog Works Radio is sponsored by Alaska Dog Works. Check out their website at alaskadogworks.com. From First Paw Media, sponsored by Alaska Dog Works Professional Canine Training Center in Anchorage, Alaska. This is Dog Works Radio, committed to families and their dogs to build lifelong and fulfilling relationships. Visit our website at dogworksradio.com. Now, here are your hosts, Robert and Michele Forto.
Hello and welcome, everybody. This is Robert from Dog Works Radio, and we have a very special guest tonight. Her name is Linda Barber Wiltsey, and she is going to talk to us tonight about traveling with dogs. And I'm really excited to jump in and talk about this topic. Linda, how's it going tonight?
Going really good.
Well, thank you for joining us. Can you do us a favor and tell our listeners who you are and what you're all about, please?
Well, I'm a retired civil engineer, and now I'm a full-time dog club volunteer. Seems like that's what I do. I'm very active in the dog community. I have had Chesapeake Bay Retrievers since 1985, and I've been very active on both the local Anchorage area, the Alaska area, and even nationwide. I've been president of my parent club, the American Chesapeake Club. And I compete in a variety of dog sports: obedience, rally, agility, done some tracking, scent work, conformation, field work. I do a variety of things with my dogs. And I'm a charter member of Alaska Canine Trainers, so I also teach dog classes through our dog club.
Very good. Well, again, thank you for joining us. And I reached out to Linda over on Facebook just a couple of weeks ago. I traveled with a relatively large dog, our Siberian Husky, from Anchorage to Atlanta to compete in a canine obstacle course race. And I had a heck of a time making sure all the logistics were followed. And I had to reach out and find out if any other people could offer tips and tricks. And Linda was gracious enough to chime in and say, yep, I can do this. I travel all the time, and I would be happy to be on the podcast. So Linda, you had said that you are a Chesapeake Bay Retriever enthusiast. Obviously, this is a dog show. You're a dog trainer, show expert, all of that. How come you chose that breed over any other?
Well, ironically, it's from an ex-boyfriend, and I kept the breed and got rid of the guy.
Okay, that's a good way to do it for sure. And you said you've had this breed for quite a while. Do you have a couple of them currently?
I actually have 8 right now.
Oh my goodness! Well, share their names with us.
Well, Kluani is my oldest. She's almost 16. And then my next one is Catchmack, and he's 13 and a half. And then the next one is Koi, and she's almost 10. And then I have littermates Deshka and Nelchina, who will be 8 in April. And then I have 3 youngsters that were born last summer in June, so they're about 16 months now. They're Dai, Taya, and Kinney.
I like it. And I love asking people how they came up with some of their names of their dogs. We're dog mushers up here in Willow. And when you have as many dogs as you and I do, sometimes it's kind of difficult to figure out what we're going to name all of these guys. Do you have a theme? It sounds like you do a little bit. What do you use to name your pups when they're born?
Well, I'm also, an occasional breeder, and my criteria is Alaska names. Between the atlases and whatnot, there is a wealth of opportunities to name your dogs. So my dogs are all Alaska. Like, Kluani is actually Kluani Lake, which is, in Yukon territory. And then Catchmack is Catchmack Bay, and Koi is for Koyukuk. And then Deshka and Nelchina, are places that you should recognize from Willow.
Right.
And then Dai is was a port of Dai, which was over by Skagway. Taya is Taya Inlet, which is also by Skagway, and then Kinney is after Kennecott Mine.
I like it. And I am really anxious to really jump into this. And we're going to start this off by talking about travel in general from Alaska. And for folks that are listening outside, as we call it, meaning in the lower 48 or other places, you probably can guess that we have to travel by plane to go just about anywhere if it's of any distance whatsoever. We have to fly to our state capital from Anchorage here. We cannot drive there unless it's a really roundabout trip through international borders and all of that. So it is a chore to get just about anywhere here in Alaska without jumping on a plane. Before we talk about traveling with your dog, Linda, how often do you travel in and out of Alaska in a year?
Well, it depends. I just got back. In the month of September, I actually did a 6,600-mile road trip with all my dogs and my RV, and I went down to Utah and back for our National American Chesapeake Club show specialty. So I took all the dogs on that trip, and then, of course, had to get health certificates to make sure I could get back into the United States after going to Canada. But I typically, in a given year, I usually will fly probably twice. Once is to go to my national show specialty, which the Chesapeake Club rotates around the country, East, Midwest, and West. And then pretty frequently, one of my dogs has been in the top 5 in agility, and I get invited to the big American Kennel Club competition that takes place in Orlando in December, which is going to be my next trip. One of my dogs, Melchina, and I are flying through the same place you just went, Atlanta, and then they're going to be driving down to Orlando for that. And I've been going to that competition. I've had a dog invited to that competition since about 2010. Before some friends of mine built Sirius Ranch in Willow, we now have a lot of opportunities for agility trials. Before they built that facility, then I would fly down to the Northwest to like Oregon or Washington so I could go to some more agility competitions since at that point we only had agility predominantly in the summertime.
And this is going to work out great because, as you mentioned, you have flown in and out of Atlanta, and that's exactly where we were at just a couple of weeks ago. So my next question, Linda, is what is your airline of choice, and is it the same if you're traveling alone as it is with your dogs? And of course, we only have 2 or 3 real options up here. We have Alaska, United, American, those sorts of things. Do you have a preference?
Well, I'm at the point where if I'm flying with my dogs, I will only fly on Alaska. If I'm going on another trip that doesn't include the dogs, then I'll probably price shop and figure out what airline gives me the best options. But when I'm, I exclusively, if I'm traveling with one of my dogs, it's only on Alaska Airlines. That's not been the case years ago. Years ago, we had options, but we don't have those same options anymore.
Right, for sure. And I was going to say the same exact thing. Traveling with our dogs by far is Alaska Air. And I think not only for the customer service that they typically provide, but just the number of flights in and out of Seattle, which is the major hub for Alaska Airlines. So they seem to fly to Alaska every half an hour or something like that. So there are lots of flights there. And as you mentioned, price shopping is a determining factor, especially if you have to load up a bunch of cargo and bags and all of that. So let's jump right into the questions. So my initial question on Facebook was, have you traveled recently with a large dog to a large airport? And you've sort of ticked off the boxes already with the Chesapeake Bay Retrievers and flying into Atlanta. So I guess my first question, Linda, are you typically flying alone with your dogs, or do you have a helper that comes along?
I typically fly alone. I do have a friend in Atlanta that oftentimes can meet me, and that's been a very huge help. However, when I travel other than to Atlanta, more often than not, I'm traveling by myself, and I may or may not. Sometimes I have somebody traveling with me, but that's not the general rule. Generally, I'm traveling alone and have to, make sure I can handle the logistics as a solo traveler.
Right. And usually here in the Anchorage airport, the check-in process is relatively seamless. We have pretty much one main ticket counter where you do that. And then right next to that is the TSA checkpoint where they check over the crate and button them up, if you will, and then we're off to security. Relatively seamless process. And then, as I mentioned, most flights will fly into Seattle, and there is a peculiar airline rule that says if you're going to have a layover of longer than 4 hours, you're supposed to go down to baggage claim, get your dog out of baggage claim so they can get out and do their business, and then you got to do that whole process over again. Have you done that process where you've had to go down and check them out and check them back in and all that?
When I flew Deshka's gone to the competition in Orlando a couple of times. And last year we had a very interesting return because of the weather in Seattle. That could be a whole podcast on its own. But anyway, the first time I flew her, because of the distance between Anchorage and Florida or Atlanta, I chose to build in a longer than 4 hour layover so I could go get her. And then I have friends in Seattle, and on the way down, one friend picked me up, and then we went off site and went, and took Deshka to a park, and we went out and went to a dog store and had a good time, and I had to visit a friend. And then when I came back on the return journey, I built in a layover, and again, two other friends came and picked us up, took us off out of the airport, and we got to walk around and whatnot, and then they returned me. So I did that. I'm going to do that this time on the way down with Nelchina, because this is only her second flight. So I've built in a long layover in Seattle on my journey in December, so that I'll get her out of I'll go get her out of, pick her up and then be able to, even if I don't get out of the airport, I can at least hang with her and get her out of the kennel. And I didn't find it to be a very big problem at all, because then you just check the Alaska Airlines baggage folks, they kept the kennel and kept my wheels there. So I didn't have to take them with me when I left the building. And then when I came back, I just went and got them, and then got in line with TSA, checked the dog, and then went back to security and got myself on the plane.
And Linda, you said right off the bat that a key tip to this is having a friend available, if that's an option, to help navigate these longer layovers, and of course the pickup times if you're flying into airports. So that definitely helps. So the next question based on that, you said longer layover, and we mentioned that 4 hour window for that necessity to pick up your dog. When you try to schedule these out, what is the time frame that you're doing this? Is it 6 hours or longer, or what?
I seldom take the option where I'm going to go get my dog. I did it, I've done it a couple of times when it's been the first long flight that a particular dog has been on. But like last year with Deshka, I just flew straight from, Anchorage to Seattle to Atlanta. And so then I needed enough time in Seattle to make sure I had enough time for her to get transferred from one plane to the other, but it wasn't enough time for me to get her out of baggage and go walk around and check her again. So the majority of my flights, even the longer flights, I do not take the option of breaking it up midway and going and collecting my dog and then checking them back in. That's kind of more the exception rather than the rule.
So if you were booking a flight tonight and you wanted to include that layover, I guess the first question would be, first off, would you do a red-eye flight down to Seattle, or would you pick a daytime flight? And then secondly, if you were going to do this layover where you take your dog out into the park and all that you said, how long would you pick for that? So would it be a red-eye or not? And then how long would you pick for that layover?
This is a very complex. I have to do my engineering mind to work my way through your answer.
Okay.
First of all, if I'm doing a layover where I have friends meeting me, I have to recognize what time of the day they're available, and also what time that they're available. And so, if I'm building my itinerary around trying to meet someone in the airport that can come pick me up and take me someplace, I need to factor in when they're available. One thing I've noticed over the years that, 1 year that I did this with Deshka, the next year I tried to do the same thing, but the flights had changed. And so I couldn't get a 4 hour type layover. All I could get was like a 6 or 8 hours. And I felt that was more than I wanted. So then I opted for no layover at all and just went basically, into Seattle and never left the airport, never collected the dog, and went on to our destination. And my dogs have all been fine with that. So, but I personally, for us, the red eye is perfect for us and our animals. I mean, our dogs are typically sleeping then. I am finding that as I'm getting older, it's harder and harder on me. But, the days of enjoying flying are gone. The flying is a quick way to get from point A to B. But the whole act of flying is no longer, it's not really enjoyable. It's just a quick way to get somewhere, then get on to enjoying what you're going to go do.
I agree with you.
So,
and when I didn't mean to interrupt, but when we talk about red eyes from Anchorage to Seattle in particular, unless you're leaving at 3 a.m. Alaska time, you're getting into Seattle around 5 or 6 a.m. And when you're thinking about having your friends pick them up, it's not very customary to be able to call somebody up and say, hey, can you meet us at the airport at 5 a.m. so we can go to the dog park? Typically, we have to, like you said, make those logistics so it works both on your schedule and your friends, right?
Yeah. And and even getting your dog in Seattle, even if you didn't have somebody meeting you, being able to get out, walk. I think when I wasn't sure if any of my friends were going to be able to meet me, there were still, I think you could still leave the airport at SeaTac and walk a little bit, maybe a block or two, and be in a grassy area. And so, even just getting around, even if it's just they're hanging, I found even hanging around in the airport, with them out of their crate, just laying at my feet when I'm sitting there in one of the benches, that was still okay for me. I mean, it was comfortable for me, and it was nice that they were able to kind of relax and get out of their kennel for a while. So, it was really icing on the cake that I had friends on each end pick me up and take me off site. That was actually, quite a luxury. And even without that luxury, I still would have benefited by doing that. But it's, if you have that opportunity to meet up with some of your friends, and with Facebook, you might have friends that you've never met in person that you have a chance to meet. So it's kind of a fun way to, break up the trip.
And Linda, one final question here in the midterm of the trip, if you will. You had mentioned having wheels for your crate. Can you tell us a bit about that? Are these wheels that is sort of like a cart situation that you have with your crate? And if so, what do you do with those wheels after you check in the dog? Do they go with the crate, or do you take them on the plane with you, or what?
So it's funny you asked that, Robert, because when you sent me the questions that I was kind of preparing for, one of the first things I wanted to talk about was, the logistics of the equipment you're traveling with, including your crate. And when I first started traveling back in the 80s, I didn't have any crate wheels. And when I finally got crate wheels, it was a game changer. And I would never fly with relying on trying to find something in the airport to get my stuff around. Being able to be portable, knowing what you have, being able to be completely self-sufficient from, getting from whatever vehicle is taking to the airport to the counter, from the counter to all your check-in, and then, then when you pick your dog up, having all that together, it just takes a lot of stress out of the trip by being able to be completely portable on your own. So I used to fly with Very kennels, and so I had a set of crate wheels that I could put my Very kennels on and then just bungee into it. I've since moved to impact crates, and I've actually flown. I have 2 impact crates, so I've actually flown with 2 dogs in my impact crate, and I have a set of wheels that go along with the impact crate. I choose not to keep the wheels attached to the impact crate when I'm checking it. I check the wheels separately. I think they get more. I've heard some folks have had them get more damaged when they're actually attached to the kennel than if they're separate. So I do have them tagged separately, but they do travel. They do, go with, they do go with the crates. They go with the crates into the cargo area. And when I've actually had my layovers in Seattle, where I've actually got the dog off, I've asked them to bring the wheels as well, because of course when I need to take the kennel and the back through security, I need the wheels so I can get my kennel and my dog back up to the TSA area where they need to get checked back in. So it's paramount to have those wheels. But I have I have a system where I can actually put both my impact crates, if I'm traveling with two dogs, stack them on top of each other, put my hand carry stuff in one of the kennels, put my suitcases on top, maybe put one dog in one kennel and then have one dog walk on a leash. And I can completely get myself wherever I need to be with all my gear without relying on finding, different, wheels. You have to go rent wheels that may or may not fit all your stuff, or a porter. I don't like any of those options. And when you're trying to get to a rental car or a tram or something, completely being portable with your own gear, knowing what you have ahead of time takes a lot of stress out of the trip.
Lots of great tips there, Linda. And like you, I just started using the impact crate. We bought one special for our dog Isolt for this trip. And of course, that's a podcast in of itself about picking the right size and airline regulations and all of that. And we could definitely talk about that in much more detail. But I really like the wheels tip. I think that is a must. I think we're going to order the set of wheels for ours, because you're right. We had to rely on finding the rental thing and, pay the $8 or whatever it costs to rent that cart, and they had to fit on there and all of that. So I think that is a great tip as well. So Linda, we have now made our way to either our connecting flight at a layover or our final destination. We have got our dog from baggage claim, collected our stuff, have our wheels on our cart, and we're off to the races, if you will. But before we go to where we're trying to go, can you give us a general idea on how long somebody should expect? And I know this is airport specific, flight specific, airline specific. What would you do if you could give somebody sort of a dead set time in the amount of time that they should prepare for in getting your dog all situated, heading out on the airplane?
Okay, for when you're flying with pets, you definitely need to allow more time, because you will not be able to go through the self-checkout or check-in kiosk. You're going to need to go to a counter with a person. And so definitely allow more time for the check-in process, because sometimes those lines get very long. And sometimes the person ahead of you has a very complicated issue, and it can take take the counter person 20 minutes to solve their problem, and you're sitting there waiting. So when you actually get into the airport, one of the first things I do is there is a form that you fill out for Alaska Airlines that has information about your dog, and it has information about you and when you fed your dog, etc. And I grab that and I fill it out, and I usually grab a second one and put it in my folder so that when I come back to the airport at the end of my trip, I already have that with me and I can get it filled out before I get to the airport. And then but I fill that out while I'm in line, because that line's going to take a while. So I get in line, and then that's where you're also going to check any other bags that you're going to check. And the airline counter is going to want to, they need to check your kennel. They need to make sure they need to weigh the kennel and then weigh it with the dog. You check all your other bags, and then you take your dog and your kennel over to the TSA folks, and then they take your dog out, and they check to make sure that, the kennel is safe and there's no, substances in the kennel that are not allowed to be shipped. And then once they have checked your kennel out and you are ready to put your dog in the kennel, they'll call for one of the Alaska Airlines baggage people to come pick up your dog. So, a lot of that's going to depend on what else is going on and how soon your flight is. And I typically wait with my dog. I wait with my dog in that area, or my dog at that point might be in the kennel, but I actually wait until the baggage people come and get my dog before I actually leave there and go get in line to go through security so I can get myself to the gate.
And on our end, when we did both in and out, so out from Anchorage and then in from Atlanta, it took almost an hour and a half on both sides. And we were flying the red eye out and a very early morning flight in. And I don't know if that's an exception to the rule, but it seemed quite a bit of time. So definitely give yourself an hour. You don't want to have to rush because, like you said, there could be time delays on the baggage side or the TSA side or whatever. So, Linda, we are now at our go ahead.
And then one of the other things an important key element that I want to say at that point, and you want to do whatever you can so that you, the human, doesn't get stressed, because that'll just transfer right to your dog and make them worried about the trip. And so, you need to do whatever, so you're not rushing, so that you're calm, so that you can pass it on to your pet.
Yeah, that's a great tip to make sure that you're not exuding that negative behavior back, for sure. So now, Linda, we have arrived at the big airport. And I say big because that's a logistical quandary in of itself. If you're flying into Anchorage, it's relatively easy to navigate your way in and out. But you had mentioned that you have flown with a dog to Atlanta. And since that's our most recent trip, we're going to use that as our example. So getting down to baggage claim typically isn't a big deal once you get off the airplane and work your way over. And then you find out where your dog is. You pick it up. As Linda gave in her tips, make sure you have your wheels attached and you're ready to go. So in one of my questions, I asked if people have ever flown into someplace like Atlanta in specific and done the rental car route. Have you ever had that experience?
Fortunately for me, most of the time in Atlanta, I've had a friend pick me up. It's been a while since I've done the rental car, so I'd have to use another airport's example. And I've actually, sometimes I've rented like cargo vans from like Budget or U-Haul, which has required me to go off premises. And depending upon what kind of ground transportation I can have, so I can get my pet with me to those, sometimes I'll use that route. Other times I'll take my chances with trying to rent something like a minivan from one of the rental facilities at the airport. And then at that point, I need to navigate to the transportation system that particular airline has to get to the rental cars. And I've had mixed experiences with that. I've been on buses, I've been on trains, but with my crate and my crate wheels and whatnot, I've been able to get to whatever the ground transportation is, dismantle what I need to dismantle, and get my stuff onto the train or the bus. The biggest, issue I've usually found on that is some of the people that are now afraid, because I'm not going to be able to lift my dogs in their kennel. I have to take my dogs out of the kennel to lift the kennel, and then I usually bring my dogs with me on leash. And, sometimes the comfort level of the people around me, sometimes they get a wide berth because because they're afraid of dogs. And sometimes I'll have people that'll help me put my stuff on. Other times I don't, but it's like, I just take my time, I need to get all my stuff on, and that's just the way it is, so it's just like everybody else getting their luggage on. My luggage just includes a kennel and a set of wheels and a dog in addition to any of the other luggage I might have.
And in Atlanta in specific, you do have to take a very busy train. I'm thinking Atlanta and Chicago have very busy, very packed trains that you have to navigate around. And I can imagine trying to do that at, 7 a.m. with 100 people trying to get in and out of the door very quickly before they close. And there you are with your crate and your wheels and all of your gear as well. Let's talk a little bit about the shuttle bus. If you've ever done this from Seattle, if you're going to the rental counter, you're taking a shuttle bus from the terminal over to the rental car area, and the shuttle bus will load you up and you're on your way. I guess the next tip I have is if the shuttle bus driver helps you either on or off, do you often tip those guys? And if you do, what's an appropriate amount, you think?
Never thought about that. I don't know. I guess if you are in the habit of tipping any of the baggage handlers, it would be about the same amount, maybe $5.
I think that that's doable, and I haven't done that either yet, but I was thinking about it as you were talking, that $5 seems reasonable, and I guess a big tip to that is make sure you have cash if you're going to do any type of tipping, because not a lot of people carry around a lot of cash anymore, so always have a couple of fives or whatever to be able to do that. So now, Linda, we've made our way to the rental car counter, and it's an entirely different process. If you're having a friend pick you up, it's pretty easy. They meet you at the arrivals area, you load up the car, and you're off. But if you're at the rental car counter, I have noticed really since post-COVID, if you will, that the rental car companies have really cracked down on allowing pets, crated or not. They're very stringent now, and we typically use Enterprise for all of our rentals, and we do quite a bit of traveling around the country, and they are very strict unless you can provide a crate, and if they're having a deposit or whatever. And you gave the tip of renting a minivan or a pickup or a large SUV or something like that. Do you have any other rental car tips if that's the route you're going?
Well, there was a period of time when I did use Enterprise because they would actually come to the airport and pick you up and then they really changed their pet policy, and I stopped using them, and they aren't my go-to anymore. And when I was in Chicago many years ago, I did a Suburban, so I had I did the the ground transportation over to the rental car kiosk or area. Then I had my crates all stacked up with my dogs in them and all my stuff. And then I went through the line. And then the big challenge I had there was I needed to put the seats down, and there were no instructions with the vehicle on how to put the seats down. So that was nobody to help me. So figuring out how to put the seats down so I could put the crates in became, quite a bit of a complex mystery for me to solve. So I do like to go with the mini. It depends on how many dogs I have, how many crates I have, but the minivan option is nice if they have the stow seat, but it's sometimes it's a bit of a challenge. Some of the seats don't go down, and some of the newer SUVs, even if the seat goes down, it's not flat.
Right.
It's like slanted. And so, it is a challenge because I have a cargo van. I mean, I have a Chevy cargo van that's my van, and so it's completely gutted, which makes it really easy for crates. And then I've noticed some of the other SUVs, that some have seats that stow nicely and you can put a kennel in, and others don't. And so that becomes a real challenge. I'm going to do a minivan this time. I haven't reserved it yet in Atlanta. I'm going to do a minivan route this time. And, and I'm hoping that I'll have enough time that I get there. And if the van that, whatever one they send me to doesn't work, that we have time to sort it out and get a different one that will work.
And you had mentioned that Enterprise is not as friendly as they used to be in terms of pets. Do you have a tip of a company that you prefer to use these days? I
don't. Like I said, my trips, I've used different options. An easy standby is a cargo van. U-Haul and Budget. Getting those vans that are used to being rented to, for people to move furniture are perfect because it's, you don't have to worry about, do you have room for your stuff, your dogs, if your dogs are muddy, you're not going to get anything dirty. Those are very easy for me to use options, but because they're not usually associated with the airport, getting to them when you're by yourself becomes a challenge. The couple of times where I used that option, I actually had somebody traveling with me, but I didn't have to try and get my dogs and my kennels over to pick it up or drop it off. I had somebody that could stay with them while I took care of the logistics of getting picking up the rental van or the cargo van.
And that's exactly.
But that becomes,
Yeah, and that's exactly what we did. My daughter flew down with us, and she waited at the arrival area, and I jumped on the train and got the rental car and drove back over and picked her and the crate and the gear up, and we were on our way. One final note about the U-Haul or that budget option that you mentioned. A key concern with that is you typically have to pay mileage with those types of rentals, where almost always a rental car will offer unlimited mileage, but you could be hit with a pretty hefty mileage fee if you rent that U-Haul cargo van. Is that right?
Well, that's a perplexing question, because I thought that as well. But when you actually talk to them, and now you're going a longer distance, the ones that I found, that then it triggers a different payment option.
Oh, okay.
So then it's I think that the scenario you described is very true if you're going to rent it for like a weekend and you're just going to move around town. But I think if you're going to rent for a longer duration, I think a lot of those, the pricing structure shifts into a different format that's based more on mileage.
So more of a typical rental car agreement, where it'd be X dollars a day for however many days, and then you're off to go. So lots of tips there, guys. If you're going to do the rental car right, make sure that you're getting a van or an SUV or whatever. And of course, this podcast episode is specific to large dogs. So if you're flying with a Cocker Spaniel, all of these tips are going to be entirely different than if you're traveling with a Chesapeake Bay Retriever or a German Shepherd or a Siberian or whatever. So now let's briefly talk about the return. And often it's the same process leaving as it is going, unless there is a hiccup. And of course, the bigger the airports, the more chances, if you will, of being hookups in terms of the number of people in line. The agents may have different training, all sorts of things. Like, for example, here in Anchorage, since there are so many dogs that fly out so often, those guys know the process in and out. But I know when we were in Atlanta, it was the first time that Alaska Airlines agent had ever checked in a dog. So she had to go over and ask her coworker for the answer for every question. Do I have to check this box, or do I have to measure at this distance, or whatever? So do you have any tips or tricks about flying back with your dog? So the trip is now half done. It's successful, at least on that way, and you're working your way back home to Alaska.
Well, I guess, my advice to anybody is be prepared for folks not to know the rules when you're in a different, especially if you're flying Alaska. The farther away from the hub you get, which is Seattle and the Northwest, the Pacific Northwest, you're actually dealing with folks that may only have one Alaska Airlines flight a day, or they may not even be Alaska Airline agents. And so you may be explaining your 49 status to them, and then you get 2 suitcases. You may be explaining the dog process to them, et cetera, which is another reason why when I'm in Anchorage, I pick up those extra forms for the crate, so that I have them and I don't have to worry about finding them when I'm in another airport, and I can have it filled out and in my part of my paperwork that I have when I get up to the counter. But just be prepared that you may find it's a different culture. You may have to help the agent understand what's going on, and you're not going to have the same knowledge base that you had when you left Alaska, for sure. And one of the things I've found the last couple of times, what I've done is I've actually checked into a hotel at the airport the night before and gotten rid of my rental car when I didn't have to worry about, because a lot of the flights that work for us to get back to Alaska are going to be those very early flights. And the danger is if you're relying on ground transportation, it may or may not run when you need it to. And then I'm always worried that I'm going to have somebody show up that doesn't like dogs. There's a number of cultures that seem to drive those rigs that are freaked out by dogs. And I would hate for them to show up and then see my dog and leave, and I don't have a way to the airport then. And so what I've done is a couple of times I've actually paid a higher price to stay at one of the hotels at the airport, so I could go ahead and in a much more leisurely fashion get rid of the rental car while my dog is in the crate in the hotel room. And then I can get rid of one stressor, which is how do you get rid of the rental car the next day when you're trying to get on your plane. So the offset is you're paying a higher price because you're at the airport, but you're removing some of the stress from the trip as well and some of the unknowns.
Lots of tips there as well. You had mentioned different cultures and different people in this process, and we didn't even get a chance to touch on using Uber or something like that. And I know Uber has very specific options on their app that allows pets. You know, they have minivans, and they'll have a little dog graphic by the car that you check, and that sort of thing. And again, that's a lot of tips that we could do on another episode as well. And there's a lot we could talk about with staying in hotels and pet-friendly hotels and all that, which is another big topic of itself. So to end this show on a high note, Linda, could you give us, and I don't mean to put you on the spot, but if you have to take some time to think about that, that is fine. Could you give us your top 5 travel tips with a large dog, whether it be the airport, having a friend, having wheels, using U-Haul, as you mentioned? They could be tips you've already said, or maybe ones that we didn't even mention yet. Top 5 tips with traveling with your large dog.
Well, probably the first tip is be self-sustained with your transportation, your ground transportation. Meaning ground transportation of you and your crates and your dog. You know, so get wheels. Practice at home, you know, getting all your gear, being able to put your dog in the crate, your carry-on stuff, your, baggage, etc. That's probably my number 1 tip. The number 2 tip is food for the dog. In years past, I would actually prepackage their meals into Ziploc bags so I could take them, and then it was very easy to, pull a bag out and feed them. If I'm gone on a longer trip where I'm going to, if I have multiple dogs and I'm gone on a longer trip, one of the options that has worked well, especially when I have my friend in Atlanta that I would stay with, is I would actually do a Chewy dog order. Of course, Chewy won't ship to Alaska, even though we are part of the United States. They don't ship to Alaska, but they will ship around around other parts, other states. And I would actually have the bag of dog food I wanted and treats and whatnot shipped to my friend's house, so I didn't have to take those with me. But be prepackaging your food so that you have all the food that that you have for your dog on your trip and all your treats. Either do it ahead of time or have it sent by one of the mail order options to someplace you can pick it up when you're on your trip. So that's probably the second thing. The third option is sometimes, I will, like when I go to Orlando, I fly into Atlanta. It's about a 6-hour drive to Orlando. I think there's too many flights going into Orlando with dogs on them, and all it takes is one hiccup, and all of a sudden you can't get out of there or you can't get in because there's no room for your dog in the cargo. So by flying into Atlanta, I get used to the time zone. It's a 4-hour time zone from Alaska, and the 6-hour drive down there is not that much for me, and my dog and I can then fly less hours and drive a little longer. So many of my journeys with my dogs, like when I go to my competitions on the East Coast, I'll fly in and out of Chicago, visit family, and then drive to the East Coast. I may not get there as quickly, but my dog is also flying for less time, and I'm getting acclimated to the climate that I'm going to and the time zone that I'm going to. Try and stay as calm as possible. Some of the stressors that have really been bad. I had one bad experience in Denver where I had pre-planned everything about the ground transportation from the hotel to the airport after I deposited my rental car, only to have the driver be someone who's completely panicked and freaked out by dogs. He had this impression that I would be able, as myself, to lift my 70-pound dog and my 50-pound kennel with my dog in the kennel by myself and put it on its end in his bus. And it's like, what part of this isn't going to happen do you want me to talk about? And I had planned ahead of time and talked to somebody about the ground transportation, and I still got this driver. And it was a very awkward experience. By the time I got to the airport, I was stressed, and of course that just transferred on down to my dog. So it made a very unpleasant experience. So, do your planning the best you can and be prepared for, allowing enough time that if you can adjust your ground transportation to accommodate, to deal with whatever is thrown your way that you didn't expect. So I guess the message there is, allow plenty of time, because there may be nuances that come up that you have to address that you can't even think ahead to even think they're going to happen. So, trying to remove as much risk as possible that you're, off your trip. getting rid of your rental car so you're not trying to figure out how to do that the morning of a flight, etc., are some good tips. So how many of those tips am I up to now on you said 5. How many is that?
That was 4.
Okay, let's see. What would be the 5th one? Have a good time on your trip. My dogs all, once we get there, they, as soon as I get them off the plane, I've had friends who've met me at the airport say, they get off the plane and they're ready to go. So I think a lot of people are worried about flying, and I get it. I understand it. I just think that my dogs are really comfortable with that. I guess probably the 5th tip is, my dogs are all crate trained already, but for folks that don't have sports that they do where their dogs are crate trained, don't show up at the airport and the first time your dog has ever seen a crate is when you show up at the airport. If you are traveling with a dog that has never flown before and never been in a crate, get that crate ahead of time and get them used to it so it feels like they're in their home before you ever show up at the airport.
And by far, that is probably the number one bonus tip of the whole episode, is to make sure that you have introduced your dog to the crate and they are comfortable in it. And that means comfortable, not just in and out in 5 minutes. They are comfortable in there, will sleep in there, the whole 9 yards. Very quickly, my tip that I don't think that we talked about on the episode is remember that most health certificates for your dog have to be renewed in 10 days. Sometimes they're 30, but I always hear on the airlines say this health certificate is only good for 10 days. Linda, I understand you have something to add about the health certificate?
Yes, I believe it's my understanding that your outbound journey has to be within the health certificate has to be issued within 10 days of your outbound journey, but you have to return within the 30 days. So I would argue with anybody who thought otherwise on that.
That's a
good tip. I would argue with the counter.
Yep, that is a good tip, and we will make sure that that is correct information, but I'm sure you know more than I do as well. So, Linda, it has been a pleasure to have you on the podcast. Such a wealth of information. I'm glad we were able to connect here. And do you have a way for folks to follow you online? Are you active on social media? I know we met up on Facebook. Where can folks go if they possibly have other questions or would like to connect with you and talk about your dogs?
Well, I am on Facebook. My Linda Barbara Wiltsey on Facebook. I'm the only one I don't think there's anybody else in the world who has a hyphenated name like mine, so I think I'm the only one. I do have a Facebook page for my dogs. It's Nuka Bay Chesapeakes. And I'm in Anchorage, Alaska, and I'm well known in the dog community. So if you ask around, there's bound to be a way to get a hold of me there. Yeah. So, reach out to me on Messenger. I'm changing, I have a GCI email, which GCI is going away. So I'm in the process of migrating to a different email. So that's probably not a good route at this point in time.
So on behalf of my guest tonight, this is Robert for DogWorks Radio. We will talk to you guys next time. Goodbye.
Got a dog training problem? There's a podcast for that to stay updated on everything dogs do on DogWorks Radio. A podcast hosted by master dog trainers and business coaches, Robert and Michele Forto. Every week, they will introduce you to pet professionals with unique insights on dogs in the veterinary world, in books and films, and working with canines. The podcast also answers questions like how long does it take to train a puppy, or what are the different training styles? Get some surprising answers on DogWorks Radio, wherever you listen to podcasts. From First Paw Media, this is DogWorks Radio. We hope you enjoyed this podcast, and we invite you to subscribe in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. You'll find a link on the episode notes. You can tap or swipe on the episode cover art, and you'll see some offers from our sponsors. You can support our show by supporting them. If you like what you have heard, we would love it if you could give us a 5-star rating and tell your friends how to subscribe too. Your hosts are Robert and Michele Forto. Our producer is Robert Forto and created for First Paw Media.